Stanford University.
You know, I'm going to come down. I'm not going to be a Statoil talking head today. You know, I'm going to speak as Bob Skinner, who's come at the oil sands from different perspectives for several decades. And I'm going to call it the way I see it and the way I've seen it. And with that caveat, I can hope that I'll get some discussion and questions, because I'm in an academic institution and I have once been an academic, and inquiry is not supported by talking heads. Okay, that worked. What I want to do is just give a context for unconventional hydrocarbons as I see them, kind of a framework for how we look at them, and or how I look at them at least, so-called difficult oil. And then I'll talk about the oil sands case and the images and how they speak a million words, but not necessarily all the words. Briefly, the technologies to get you thinking about questions, and then the warts, the challenges, the issues, and how to look at them in a sort of standard business school approach to look at any kind of industry. And then look at SAGD, steam-assisted gravity drainage. And one of the themes I want students to think about is technologically complex systems, when you start out with them, have a lot of technology upside, and especially for the oil sands business, because it's a manufacturing business. You make a little improvement in a little tweak in something that adds up to maybe 2 cents a barrel, then it applies to those millions and millions of barrels over 35, 40 years of a project, and that cash flow as it builds. And so that's kind of an investment perspective of how you look at innovation in the oil sands. And then I'll look at some of those technology challenges, just a few that I think are opportunities. And then a supply outlook for unconventional, just a slide or two on that. A little bit on intellectual property. And if I can get out of here, get you back to discussion, you know, within 45 minutes, I'll be lucky. Technological complexity equals technology upside. If you could just keep that in the back of your mind, and as you look at some of these flow charts or whatever. In terms of how I look at unconventional hydrocarbons, of course, it's the oil shale, and you've heard speakers talk about this in the series. And as one expert with the U.S. Geological Survey once wrote, oil shales is tomorrow's oil and always will be. But companies are working on technologies to develop it. This is coal to liquids. This is the Sasol plant in South Africa, a huge complex to produce about 150,000 barrels a day from coal using Fischer-Tropsch. This is oil sands. That digger and shovel, if it was operating at optimum, would be producing about 50,000 barrels a day. They have 3 in that particular mine to make 150,000 barrels a day. But it doesn't operate at optimum, obviously, because that shovel, which holds the capacity of a yellow school bus, and the truck holds 4 school buses, and 2 tons of oil sands makes 1 barrel of ultimately synthetic crude oil. Just do the numbers, and you can go to the website for that digger, and you can see that's all about is the mining is all about logistics. And this is the upper photograph is from Cold Lake. It's ultra heavy oil or extra heavy oil, and the lower one is from the Orinoco, and this is the GTL plant, the new one, Oryx in Qatar, and this is an ethanol plant. I think one of the bigger ones in the U.S., and it uses coal to make ethanol with corn. Coal is a source of energy. You know, a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to define unconventional oil, and I'm delighted that I finally got the International Energy Agency to stop using non-conventional, which is a funny freight train word, and use unconventional, and someday these oils may become conventional. It's easy to find but difficult to produce. It requires some kind of special completion or stimulation to production techniques to get it to surface. It's sometimes referred to as resource plays. And I'm including oil and gas here in this kind of framework for thinking about it. Shale gas is a resource play. They're continuous deposits. The oil sands are at the feather edge of the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. The oil migrated up Goes in southern Alberta all the way up to Athabasca and down over to Peace. Similar to the Orinoco is at the feather edge of that particular type of basin, the slightly different basins. And in Nigeria, there's also a heavy oil belt that's at the feather edge of a basin. The development is very much like mining geology. You zero in on the sweet spot, if you like, and then you follow it. And that's basically what they do in shale gas. Find the sweet spot in the shale gas shales, and that's also what we do in the oil sands. That whole vast area you see on maps of the oil sands is not developable as it is. You've got to find those pods of stacked channel sands or rich bitumen to produce. And remember, the purpose of the liquids is so you can drive your cars around, and I can fly back and forth to California. And the whole goal is to increase the hydrogen content. And this is a framework I came up with a few years ago. I was writing a book on difficult oil. I never finished it because I went off and worked for the Norwegians. But you know, oil and shale and coal are the sources of oil and gas, and depending on whether you cook the shale enough, you'll get oil or gas. And the whole point is to accelerate or reverse geological processes, and that's the key. If you're substituting for geological time and processes, you're requiring an enormous amount of energy, resources, people power, water, and so on, and materials. And you know, on the accelerating side, I put coal bed methane, tight gas, shale gas, and oil shale and shale oil, and you know the difference. Oil shale is what previous speaker has spoken about. It's kerogen. It hasn't yet gone down through the kitchen in the heating and pressure to be converted to hydrocarbons or petroleum products. And then there's shale oil like the Bakken, which is just oil in the shale that never migrated out, and so we want to hurry up geology, and so putting a lot of fracking the shale to get it out. And then coal to liquids, of course, it's a conversion. You're using Fischer-Tropsch for some of the direct conversion, heat and in the absence of oxygen. And then on the reversing side, you've got a whole array of things that get increasingly solidified, from the ultra heavy, the Orinoco, and the bitumen and the oil sands, and they're more and more degraded right down to gilsonite and ozokerite and albertite and all kinds of odd things. You can look them up, and they're basically solid. And I stuck in stranded gas as a way to, for gas to liquids, which is another conversion product, and I've also stuck in LNG, because I think if you look at the portfolios of oil and gas companies, you'll see more and more of unconventional hydrocarbons, and LNG is a big component of that. And that's a way of looking, analyzing industries to see, through time, to see how much of their portfolio is made up of LNG and these oddball things. And it tells a story. And then, of course, hydrates I stuck out there as a solid. I don't know quite yet what I'm going to do with them, but...
That's the stuff at the bottom of the ocean?
Yes, and also below permafrost in the north, yeah. It goes back when the glaciers were there. It was very cold, and yeah, fairly shallow.
And it might come up if we warm up enough.
Well, it does come up if you, we actually, when we were drilling in the Mackenzie Delta in the early days, we killed people on the rigs because they encountered this stuff at a very shallow depth. And of course, when it converts from 1 to whatever it is, 260 volume metrically or something like that, it's rather spectacular as the drill strings come out of the well. Yes, but there it's in big lenses. It's rather massive. Okay, that's kind of a framework. The technologies are there, and you'll have this presentation after if you want to think about it. And of course, I stick in biofuels. Most agencies don't do that, but I stick it in because it's all aimed at replacing oil and substituting for the conventional oil. And maybe it's hurry-up geology, I don't know. But I'm always intrigued about why politicians, when they open an ethanol plant, they talk about it in liters per year, not barrels. And so, well, why don't you talk about it in shot glasses per year? The numbers are even more spectacular, And the photo on the left is the Kern River, it's the Colorado Shale. That's the kerogen uncooked stuff, and middle is the Athabasca bitumen, not tar. Tar actually comes from, the origin of the word comes from pitch or from pine trees that were used to caulk Her Majesty's ships, and the word that goes way back to a few hundred years ago. And the little stuff on the right is gilsonite. It was in veins over in the in Nevada, I think it is. Not Nevada, but Utah. The oil sands case. Okay, the resource, it's huge. It's the official numbers for initial volumes in place at 1.8 trillion barrels. It's probably more if you stepped outside the contoured areas. And if you out in here, there is bitumen out in this area, but it's not thicker than 1.5 meters. It's still there's oil all through the thing, but perhaps 2 trillion barrels of bitumen originally in place. For those who do resource statistics and so on, imagine how much oil that was before it degraded. I've heard estimates of perhaps 6 or 7 trillion barrels of light sweet oil that migrated and then was degraded. It's interesting that this carbonate play, which I've highlighted in magenta, is something that you didn't see in the government's estimate of resources, at least not as is numbered like this, but because there are companies that have taken leases to develop that carbonate, which is in a high, it's in the Paleozoic down below the Cretaceous McMurray Formation. And you're going to see more and more business focusing on that from some companies. Imagine putting steam in dolomite and fractured dolomites and limestones. It's a technological challenge. So looking at electrical methods, resistance heating, and so on. What you get on here is the richest part of the McMurray is up here in the mining area. If you can imagine the McMurray Basin back in the times of Allosaurus and Plesiosaurus were wandering around here, and the dinosaurs, Plesiosaurus in the water. This has had embayments out here, and basically like Chesapeake Bay. Reverse it, there was a boreal sea. The current flow was in this direction with a big tidal amplitude coming in, and that set the sedimentological environment. The oil, when it was tilted as the basin sunk, and the oil migrated up, and this is basically the water zone over on that side of the McMurray. It's full of water. So, but the rich fairway of where the oil is just over against that zone, and then you have tributaries that come in off a rising landmass here, and so this is where the thickness of the pay goes up to 70 to 100 meters in the mining area. That's at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay where the finds were winnowed out, and you have less muds and more sand. Geology is fortuitous and generous to some, not to everybody. Just some photographs. I used to say that oil sands really is yesterday's oil, because the Aboriginals used to scrape the tar, and this is just, this is on the Athabasca River, right down by the water, which is just here. And in the hot sun in the summer, it melts out. And this is on a fresh face in the mines, and the bitumen is actually melting out and dribbling down the surface. This is the carbonates underneath, and it was there for millions of years, and caves and whatnot developed in that carbonate. And in drilling in that carbonate, you can drill through meters of caves that are just full of bitumen. And that's what's interesting some companies. Pictures. This is to the east of the oil sands area where there are more lakes, and the boreal forest is vast, it's beautiful, it's desolate, it's monotonous, has 7 species of woody trees, it's ravaged by forest fires. 20,000 square kilometers a year are burnt by forest fires, according to the Federal Department of Forestry. They start by lightning. But this picture is a Greenpeace picture, and it is but ugly. I mean, an open pit mine is not pretty, no matter what it is, except to a mining engineer. But there's no question about it, is that when this open pit iconography got out in the industry a few years ago, it really dominated the image of the oil sands. And it's what the industry and the governments of Canada have to contend with now. This is a photograph in the mine. Interesting how these bulldozers are pushing the oil sands down to this lip. There's a job for you. Those trucks, by the way, that are hauling the oil sands, the operators prefer that women drive them because they're much easier on equipment than men. And there are many of those trucks are driven. They're 400-ton trucks driven by women because they're gentle with the equipment. Stands to reason, doesn't it? And this is, I forget which mine it is, I don't really care, but it's one of the mines, part that's been rehabilitated or started been revegetated. Now, just some numbers. And whenever you talk about these numbers, people say, there he goes, a talking head for the oil industry trying to excuse the oil sands. No, I'm not trying to excuse the oil sands. What I'm trying to say is, if you don't have perspective, then you really can't settle down and have an intelligent debate about what needs to be done and how fast you can get it done. And whenever people talk in the energy business about, we got to have balance between the economy and jobs and the environment, again, you're dismissed because, what he's doing is apologizing. He's trying to buy time so he doesn't have to do anything. Well, things are being done, but it's extremely slow in this industry. And in discussion, we can talk why it's slow to introduce new technologies. But there's a little detail. Now let's get into the characteristics of the oil sands. If it wasn't for this little skin of oil around the sand grains, we'd have a hell of a time getting that bitumen off the sand grain. And that is key to the caustic soda hot water process in the mining. It's key to SAGD. It's key to the new technologies of using electricity induction, because this is kind of salty. And imagine if you run an electric current through that and how it heats up. And there's a pilot project at Poplar River by ET Energy, which is getting some very interesting results by putting electrodes into the oil sands. And actually, it's amenable to that area around the mining area that's too deep to mine but too shallow to use the in situ processes. So electricity has some considerable potential. It's those little devils up there that are a problem with the fine tailings that are just a slurp in the tailings ponds that don't settle for years and years and years. And the industry is now under a lot of pressure by the regulators and by themselves to straighten out that fine tailings problem, and so you can recover the surface sooner. I think you've seen a slide like this in Tony Kovcek's presentation, and Adam Brandt's recent work on the oil sands and the comparisons. It's not very nice stuff. Athabasca bitumen compared to other heavy crudes. And if you were to look at, for example, WTI or Brent, you don't even come close. Well, you would be boiled off more than 50% of the barrel of crude before you got to what you get to these products at twice the temperature. So it's not very nice stuff. The residue has to be broken down. You got to either add hydrogen to it or take that stuff out in a coking refinery. It's got a lot of nasties in it, and it's acidic. It's got a high total acid number. It is very difficult stuff to process.
You're saying it's mostly carbon?
Yes, it's got long carbon asphaltene molecules in it. And it does have, obviously, this is under vacuum distillation, so it does have gas oil and distillate and a very tiny bit of naphtha on the top. In technologies, again, the mining, you've seen the pictures of it. I'm not going to spend any time on it. This is the so-called cyclic steam process used in the Cold Lake area. It's huff and puff. You inject steam for several weeks under high pressure, basically crack the formation, let it soak for several weeks, and then pump for several weeks. It could be longer than that, depending on where you are in the life of that particular phase. I love these engineered diagrams of SAGD. The reservoir is nice and uniform, and the steam chamber develops from these two wells. Two wells are about 5 meters apart and maybe 700 to 1,000 meters long, and they're about 100 meters apart in the reservoir. Engineers' diagrams are great, but that's not how geology is. We'll come back to that. In terms of new technologies, there's this toe-to-heel air injection process, which is a fire flood, which is being piloted up there at the moment. You inject air in these vertical wells, and it causes a fire flood that coaks, and the heat front drives the oil to these horizontal wells that you produce it from. This is this ET energy using the electric probes, electrodes. And then they're also using ideas of using electrical resistance heating. For example, in the carbonate play, there's a pilot that's being started. And then there are several variants on solvent, solvent alone, solvent steam, hot solvent, or whatever that are being piloted and experimented with. The idea of solvent, you can, if you go to the beach at Fort Lauderdale, you walk on the beach, you get tar on your feet. I remember that 40 years ago. You have two ways of getting it off, and one's using solvent, and the other one's using heat. And normally, the solvent's better. And so, if you want to make it mobile, that'll work. But again, your solvents are worth much more than the bitumen you're getting out. So the trick is to make sure you don't leave a lot of solvent in the reservoir. Just the history in the oil sands, leading up to SAGD. There was a huge debate 3 or 4 years ago that, SAGD is old technology, and, you should wait for some new technology to be developed. And this is just, it's old stuff. But if you look at the history, 1893, the Geological Survey of Canada mapped the oil sands for the first time. Now, it goes back, the first oil sample, bitumen sample, was delivered by an Aboriginal to a Hudson's Bay trading post in 1713 or something like that. And, what is this stuff? They always knew the white man was looking for funny stuff, so what is this stuff? And that's like 1,500 kilometers away over on Hudson's Bay. And, I put this slide together last summer just after the Macondo accident, and they thought the big oil mother lode was down below this tar, and so they drilled a hole up there, drilled a well looking for this stuff, and there's gas underneath and some over to the west, and gas above the bitumen. They hit a gas below, and it blew out for 21 years. It was very difficult. Eventually, the regulator took it over, and after a great deal of difficulty, got it under control. But and a lot of research went on in the 1920s. That Carl Clark came up with the caustic soda hot water process, which is used today in the mines, in the mining process, variations on it. Dr. Butler came up with the idea of SAGD. In '69, the first pilots were developed in the 80s, and then they actually put a mine shaft down just west of the mines, of the underground mines, and drilled from the carbonate, nice cool environment, constant temperature, up into the bitumen to actually prove the SAGD concept. And that was done in the late 80s, and then oil price was low and not much happened. We got a new fiscal regime, and finally we now have about 20 or so commercial projects under development. So it's taken a long time to get to where we are today, and we're still learning, and we'll be learning for 30 years as we develop this resource. You can look at any industry, any problem, and how we got to where we are using 3 lenses: economic, sociopolitical, and technical. And some of the challenges come out of, and I'm not going to go through all these, as you go into an oil sands business, what's going to be the oil price? It's going to be the gas price, because gas is your primary fuel for making steam. How do you get the capital? How can you reduce the capital? These are very capital intensive, anywhere from $40,000 per running barrel for a SAGD project to over $100,000 per running barrel for an integrated mining and an upgrading project. Labor is an issue. What are the differentials going to be? All these have to go into your planning assumptions. Sociopolitical, regulatory delays, health and safety. Safety in this boom working environment is a big challenge. Dealing with the Aboriginals, the First Nations, is something that is extremely compelling, very important, and it is a major challenge. Basically, it's a 4th level of government along with federal, provincial, and municipal. Actually, I would say that the oil sands are probably the most regulated oil and gas or oil industry business in the world. It is extremely regulated. It takes years to get an approval. And then the technical, there are many technical challenges, land reclamation, greenhouse gases, obviously water, we'll talk more about them. The real warts are I think the big wart is water. The use of surface water, particularly in the mining area, they draw from the Athabasca River. It is perceived as being perilous, even though they only take about 0.5% of the discharge, and they're really constrained during the low winter flow periods. The air emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, the industry probably produces for 39 million tons, probably 40 million tons today. That compares with 55 times that from coal-fired power stations in the U.S. Or the biggest coal-fired power station in the U.S. is on the East Coast, and it's about 23 million tons according to that company's oil website. But it is an important issue, and yes, the emissions per barrel of product have come down by 39, 38% since 1990, but it's not going to keep coming down at that rate. Acid gas emissions and other things that are coming out of the stacks and raining on the downwind, and then the snow melts and then ends up in tributaries and then in the river, going down the river. Some recent research that shows that that's a concern. Land, yes, the animals, there is woodland caribou in this area, and then there's the traditional use of the land by the Aboriginals and that linkage, which is very important to respect and to understand local communities. And if you've read some of the recent reports on the oil sands, I think the most compelling thing that the industry's got to pay attention to is the issue of monitoring. And monitoring of air emissions, monitoring of water quality, monitoring of every aspect of our industry and what it's doing to the environment. Because the industry and the government is exposed. In fact, one of the government panels recently said it's a first or world-class resource with a third-class monitoring regime. And industry and government are both remiss in not doing more, faster, and better in the whole area of environmental monitoring. And the industry is trying to catch up with this and is trying to be out in front of regulators to do more, as I think they should. But then there's a risk of how far you go beyond what governments might eventually come down with. Previous speakers have, Adam has, Brand has talked about the full cycle greenhouse gas emissions. There have been a lot of analysts, and he's recently written a paper for the European Commission critiquing the various full cycle analyses of greenhouse gas emissions from different oils. And oil sands is up there, and it's not a surprise because it takes so much energy to get that stuff out of the ground and get it to your gasoline tanks. This is from the International Energy Agency, which took a whole bunch of those studies and summed them, I think, in their most recent World Energy Outlook. Is that not correct, Adam?
Yeah, I haven't seen that source.
Okay. Now the SAGD and the value chain, I'm not going to spend time talking about upgrading and the pipelines, but you have to look at the business in terms of the value chain. You can't just go in and do your economics and say, well, it costs so much to make a SAGD project. You've got to be thinking about what's going down in the industry. And the waxing and waning of the fervor in the refining industry downstream in terms of putting in cokers in the US is very important. So suddenly a big company says, oh, we decided not to put a coker in. Then your perception of what differentials are going to be going out changes. Or if someone says we're going to put a coker in, someone else says, aha, because the industry is very much monkey see, monkey do. They say, oh, we're going to put a coker in too because their share price went up because they started putting in a coker, and the Canadians producing all this stuff. And so so you got to watch that, and the differentials are wide, and they'll put in cokers. If they're narrow between heavy and light crude, they'll say, well, my goodness, it doesn't pay to put a coker in. Just focusing on this you know, the central processing facility is water in and water out. And most of that plant is basically to clean up the water, get it ready for the steam boilers, and I'll show a picture later, and then to clean it up after you get it back and then recycle it. And you happen to get bitumen as a byproduct. And the bitumen stream, and this is very simple, it just comes out, comes back on the pipes and ends up in the tanks, cleaned up a bit obviously, and then from the water, and then it's in the sales tanks. And that's quite simple. The rest of the plant is dealing with water. But there's a whole host of challenges that you got to deal with just in the CPF. You know, just for example, the footprint. You get the footprint down because that saves money. Let's just, you know, the dewatering, the process of dewatering, desalting, deoiling, water heating, and gas treating. You know, treating the natural gas that you get back because you use a bit of gas lift in some plants. Cleaning up the solvent or the condensate that you use to clean up the oil to get the last bit of oil out of the water. And then looking subsurface, and we'll look more at that in a minute. The reservoir is everything. It's, you need to think about thief zones. What do I mean by thief zones? Water on top of the bitumen. Water zones or natural gas zones on top of the bitumen that are in pressure connection with the bitumen. You know, if you put a steam chamber and it goes up into a water chamber on top of the bitumen, that doesn't do much for your energy. You know, it just flushes down through your chamber and you've perhaps lost your well, or you're putting a lot of energy into a perched water zone that could be in the oil sands if you're over close to the water leg of the McMurray. So you can see from this little diagram at the bottom that geology is more complicated than, and we'll come back to that, more complicated than just simple a layer cake picture. This is a SAGD plant, 20,000 barrels a day. This is Statoil's. A lot of this is the construction which has now been moved out, but this is the plant itself. The natural gas and electricity comes in here. This is the steam boilers. This is the water cleanup and oil water separation. This is water preparation, the water tank to put back into the steam boilers, and the separation tanks. That's the diluent tank, and these are the sales tanks. So most of that is water management. And these are the lines going out, the steam lines going out to the well pads and the emulsion line coming back. And here's the challenge. 20% of the energy that goes in is above ground in that picture I just showed you. And that's where the opportunities are in terms of energy efficiency and heat exchangers. And here's a problem. 74% of the heat is left in the reservoir. So I've challenged some of the students today to think about how can you use those geothermal deposits, if you like, after we're gone, you know, for local sustainable industries for the Aboriginal communities and local communities. There's an enormous amount of energy is going to be left in the ground. Legal issues, who owns it, etc. These are steam oil ratios. By steam oil ratio, how many barrels of water do you raise to steam to produce a barrel of oil? And these are a bunch of projects. And you can see that this is a log scale, obviously. You can see that, you know, not too many get below 2 or 3. You know, there are very few. This is 2. This is 3, 4, and some are well above. This one of these is having a lot of problems with perched water zones in their formation that rob the energy. Others are too close to a water zone down below the bitumen. You know, water treatment, I've mentioned that. To reduce it, to recycle it, the SAGD industry recycles 80 to 95% of the water. They don't use it, or rather consume it, they use it. In the mining, tailings reduction and separation, getting the fine tailings settled out so they can recuperate the surface, get it ready to be revegetated. Greenhouse gas emissions, land reclamation in the SAGD projects, all those little well pads, the seismic lines, the winter drilling program that you have to find more. I mean, getting those things revegetated, getting them back, capable of going back to not their original, because you never can, but you can get them back to reforested in their original, rather into a reforested state. But above all, you know, we're still feeling our way and learning about the subsurface. And if you can understand the subsurface, it's not a steam chamber rarely develops like this. It develops often like that, often sometimes jumping across to an adjacent well pair, because the geology can change so abruptly. It's a photograph I took in the mine about 10 years ago, and you can see that there's a channel cut in there. And if you look at the massive bitumen-soaked sand, there's bitumen throughout this slide, but if you imagine this as being where you have massive coarse sand that's full of bitumen, where the steam would move up very quickly, and then try to imagine a SAGD well pair in it, and that's about 5 meters, you know, based on the section. Then you know, where do you start steaming when you want to get these two wells to communicate? That's what you do. Put steam here and steam there at first, and when they start to communicate, the pressure is the same. Then you convert this one to steam, and this one is a producer. So if you're going to put steam here, it's probably not. It's going to have a hard time moving up through this shaly zone. You want shale zones because they'll tend to move the steam chamber out, but too much can cause you problems. So this is another part in the mine. It's a very common sedimentary feature you get in the oil sands. And again, where do you put the well pair, in what direction, and how do you expect the steam chamber to evolve? I said we're going to see something about patent activity. If you look at this graph, extraction methods really are the area where there are a lot of patents. And if you look at researchers or universities, the blue one, they're not very present. They're not very present in any of these things. Service companies do quite a bit. Oil and gas companies are doing a lot. And it's that subsurface where there's a lot of patenting going on, because companies want to protect their maneuverability to actually use them. In terms of extraction methods, there's a lot on steam, but there's an awful lot of work going on in other methods, electrical methods, electricity and variants on that. This patent activity kind of follows oil prices. And it's, in terms of outlook for oil sands, you know, the current capacity that's supposedly operating is about I think it's 1.8 million barrels a day, but we're producing maybe 1.4, 1.5 million barrels a day. If you look at all of the projects that are proposed in the regulatory process, under development, under construction, or operating, there may be 7.7 million barrels a day, but and people will be projecting, you know, a lot of oil being produced out to 2020, but I don't think history supports that argument. If you look at the industry associations and others' projections through time, you'll see that, just for example, if you keep your eye on 2015 and 2006, 2007, you know, the future never seems to come. And why is that? I mean, again, it's behavior. North American investors invest very impatient money. Adam was so impatient he threw his he threw his wedding ring at me. It's Valentine's Day. What are you doing?
It's in my nature to fidget.
Okay, so I go tell your wife. That woke him up over there. But really, the industry association takes all the industry's proposals and say, you know, then we're going to produce 200,000 barrels a day, and you know, and then they go through it and they risk all of these things. You know, that company they can't even raise a dollar, let alone $4 billion. So they'll risk that out. But even after risking these outlooks, the future, you know, delivers this stuff reluctantly. It really is very slow oil, and I think, in my own view, I think we'll have difficulty to get to 2.2 million barrels a day by 2015. And in unconventional liquids outlook, I've been in touch with my former colleagues at the IAEA, and I've stuck in biofuels just to see what this looks like, and then what is percentage. And this is fairly bullish, and I'm not quite that bullish, but this would be in 2035 over 12.5% coming from all these oddball liquids of total global supply of whatever it is. I think it's 105 million barrels a day at that time. So it's very difficult oil, it's very slow, and it's very capital intensive. 1 million barrels a day, I was just talking to Sally before we come over here, 1 million barrels a day of capacity, the capital cost is about $1 trillion. It's about $1 trillion, say 800 billion to $1 trillion to produce that kind of capacity. And this is the IEA's projection, and you can see unconventional, and that's without biofuels, is a fairly ambitious part of the future oil supply. But this is where the problem is, and that's where the challenge is. Let's talk.
Well, I think we have a request.
You want to go back to that?
For 1 minute?
Yeah.
And of course, if the price of oil should go down, then all these figures come down.
Okay, anyway, let's thank you. And
Yeah.
Again, since this is a class, we like to start with students first, so anyway, yeah.
What technologies do you use to reclaim the water? Is there any new companies that you, or new advancing the technologies that you adopted in the past few years?
Well, you know, they are fairly standard. You know, you've got to separate the oil from the water. You get back this stuff, which is a mixture of oil. This is for a SAGD project, right? Yeah. That's a mixture of oil and salty water, because the formation is salty and it's got all kinds of other stuff in it. And so you put it through, first of all, a flotation thing that just separates, and then you can put in condensate, which is a very light hydrocarbon, and that will mix with the oil and make it, the bitumen, make it lighter so it floats, right? Then you take the water back and you put it through eventually walnuts, right, to clean it up, and you've got to put in a descaler to take out all the alkaline stuff, and you want to produce the very soft water. Don't ask me what whether it's a warm lime softener. Yes, that's one I've heard people say, but I'm not an engineer. So, but they're fairly standard technologies, and you know, people are fiddling around with them, and there are different approaches. But you know, a lot more needs to be done, because it's kind of robust and chunky. You know, these things, if remember the numbers I was talking about, you know, $45,000 per day for running capacity. A guy comes along and says, hey, I got this new idea. You know, I want you to put this water softening technology in your next phase of 40,000 barrels a day. $40,000, that's 1.7 billion dollars, and to put that plant at risk for a new idea. It takes so long to get a new technology, a new idea, pilot it, prove it, and then get it so that bankers and everybody else will say, yeah, we'll give you money to do your next phase. I didn't answer your question very well, did I? Good. No, I don't know the name brands, and there's one lime softener is one.
I'm doing similar projects in Kern River, and
okay.
They're adopting a lot of new, young startups.
Yep.
New water treatment technologies, and just want to get your perspective on.
Do you think that have you asked anybody whether they're using the same thing in the oil sands?
Nobody wants to tell.
Oh, is that right?
Nobody wants to explain the details. You see new buildings, new technologies, new people involved in it.
Go to the suppliers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, how about over there?
You've been pretty good at putting your oil aside. Here's a question to kick it a little bit further. But do you think that there's enough incentive currently for companies developing the oil sands to be environmentally conscious? Do you think that there needs to be further regulations along those lines?
I did say that I expect governments to be much more aggressive on requiring industry to do better monitoring. You know, water, air quality, water, and so on. And I welcome that and anticipate that. And a smart company will anticipate that and try to be ahead of the curve. I think, you know, to look back, the industry and the regulator were remiss in not requiring the mining companies to rehabilitate the mined areas sooner and more. And I think you can ask the former regulator, and I'm sure they would all tell you that. Because what did it do? I mean, we had this huge, ugly pictures that went all over the world. And Canada, you know, prides itself as being an environmentally, you know, a progressive country. I mean, the Great Lakes Treaty with the U.S., the Migratory Birds Treaty, species at risk, you know. We got gazillion square kilometers of parks, national parks, provincial parks, and so on. And the protection of the natural environment in Canada is part of being a Canadian. And so, you know, Canadians, we're not just a bunch of people who just like, rip her up and, you know, leave a hole in the ground. So, yes, there will be more regulations. I think on greenhouse gases, Canada faces a challenge. You know, you are the largest trading partner Canada has. Up until recently, that was the largest bilateral trading relationship in the world, the Canada-U.S. trading relationship. You know, we cannot go out ahead and put in place a, you know, carbon tax or a cap and trade program without being lockstep with our friends in the U.S. And, you know, what's going on in Washington is not exactly pregnant with the potential to have, you know, progressive greenhouse gas or climate policies. So yes, there are policies coming, regulations coming, I suspect. In fact, Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America to put in a carbon charge. There's a $15 carbon charge, and it's small, but it's a start. And they have spent $2 billion, or have budgeted $2 billion to look at greenhouse gas emissions. They start up some pilot projects, and there are 3 or 4 that have qualified for that, and the federal government's put $1 billion into it. So yeah, an industry can always do more. I mean, the company I work for, we have a very ambitious greenhouse gas, or rather efficiency programs, technologies that we want to experiment with and pilot at this small project we started. You know, whether it's subsurface understanding, you know, how to put steam in there better and control the steam so you're not, you know, whacking steam into an unproductive area, solvent co-injection, and managing that plant better so you get good reliability, not having it down, feeling your way in the reservoir with the steam with control devices and so on. There's a lot of things that can be done, and you've got to run them for a couple of years to have proper experimental work. But we're not the only ones. I think the other companies are doing stuff as well so that you get more oil out with less energy.
Okay.
It's a good
All
question.
right. Another one. Anyway, we got any more students out there? You a student? Yep. Yep.
So I have a question about the economic point of view of Canada in this problem. So if they increase their, you know, capacity of producing oil sands, this will have a negative effect on the oil prices, and, you know, will decrease their margins. And on the other hand, if they postpone extracting the oil sands, they will benefit more non-competitive environment in the, you know, 20s, 40s or 50s. They will gradually become the monopolists in the oil markets because these conventional oils are going down so rapidly. So what are the economic policies and economic interests of Canada and Alberta?
Hey, the only monopoly that Canada has is good hockey players. But you know, Ali, the point I wanted to make is that this is fairly marginal in the world of oil. I think the IEA projects 2011 world oil demand to be 89.3 million barrels a day. You know, annually we're going to increase our supply by about, gosh, I don't know, 150,000 barrels a day per year, if we're lucky. Meanwhile, oil is coming down like a house of fire in some of the offshore fields, and non-OPEC. It's declining at 7%, 8%, 10% in some fields. So, and then the industry's out there trying to replace that oil, but are not doing a very good job of it. So I don't really think the oil sands are a threat in terms of the oil price. They, virtually all non-OPEC oil, offshore Brazil, offshore Gulf of Mexico, requires $60, $70. If the price were to drop to $25 a barrel, we certainly wouldn't be building new oil sands plants. We would probably just write off the capital that we have in the oil sands industry and then carry on. You wouldn't shut them down because the operating cost is not that. But most OPEC countries would have a very hard time surviving on $25 a barrel. Look at their budgets, their budget prices.
Okay, all right. Okay, how about Kareem?
So back in the figure where you mentioned that there's a 74% requirement in energy that is basically staying in the subsurface, what temperature are we talking about there?
Our operating pressure, our operating temperature is around 200, 220 degrees centigrade.
And is most of this heat, if you want, or energy, is it stored in the rock after you do the...
Yeah, it's in the sand.
Okay.
In the sand and the water that, obviously if you're going to take out the bitumen, you're going to leave water in the pore space, and so.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, 74% is a huge quantity. Why isn't just simply heating the oil still surrounding it, which is near the next well, and just you can take it?
Oh, it is. In fact, as you have the well pairs and you're drawing down the steam chamber, you have this wedge of bitumen in between the wells that you can get at, and so now people are drilling wedge wells. They put a producer in there, steam it for a while till they get communication with the chambers, and then get an enormous amount of heat. And also towards the end of the life of a SAGD project, there are ideas of injecting non-compressible gas that would keep the pressure on, because this heat is just going to be producing oil. But you reach a point of diminishing returns where you don't want to put more energy in because you're going at this very and you've reached the ceiling of your chamber, and so, but there is a way of getting, and of course that reduces your steam-oil ratio, right? Because you're not putting more energy in. So
just as a last follow-up, what's the recovery factor that you're achieving in these reservoirs?
That's a very good question, because people say, well, you got gazillion billion barrels and you got your recovery factor. You say, well, it's 55 to 60%. What? It can't be. Well, it is in the development area where you're actually going to be running the steam. You're going to be getting about 55 to 60% of the oil out of that area, or maybe more depending on the quality of the reservoir.
Okay, all right, let's go. How about right back there? Yep, you, yeah.
All right.
Me?
Oh,
No.
I'm sorry, no, him first, and then you. Yeah, you'll be second.
So I just wanted to point out that the Americans did beat Canadians at ice hockey in Vancouver, and
The Americans beat the Canadians.
in the non-important.
Was that women's hockey, was it?
I don't know.
And I wanted to know whether oil sand fields whether there are any oil sand fields that outside of Canada or Alberta that have been identified as economically viable, where technology transfer, the technology collaboration would happen.
Well, the Faja Arauco of Venezuela is an oil sand, but it's actually, they call it extra heavy oil. The API is about 8.5 degrees, yeah? But it's the reservoir is at 55 degrees centigrade as opposed to 8 to 10 degrees centigrade, and so it flows on when you drill into it, and it's comparable. And I mentioned Nigeria. There's one in Kazakhstan as well. I don't know very much about, but there's a lot of heavy oil around the world in Russia. But Russia has a lot of light and medium oil that they would prefer to produce. There's heavy oil in the Middle East, in Oman, and in the neutral zone in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. And technologies are, companies are looking at, how to produce that stuff, because we're getting down to the bottom of the resource pyramid in terms of accessible oil.
Okay, we'll take 3 more questions. We'll start with you in the back. Yep.
My question has to do with apparent 2 realities here. We know from our best estimates at this point that in 2011 we're supposed to be reducing CO2 emissions by 4% a year. Since 2011. And yet, you're saying that $1 trillion to get 1 million barrels of oil per day is a valuable investment to make for the future? I mean, I'm not sure I understand.
No, I'm not making
the
a judgment,
thinking
I'm just
here.
saying that's what it costs.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is if you're going to get any portion of that 1 trillion barrels of oil that you say is available in the deposits, just so you can burn it, when we know we can't be doing that, why does it make any sense actually talking about all this?
Yeah,
I hate to bring engineering reality into this, but you know.
okay, 85% of the world's primary energy, fossil fuels. 38%, whatever it is oil, coal, and natural gas. Coal is, what's the most, of all the primary energy, nuclear, hydro, and I'm including those, is natural gas, coal, and oil. Which one has grown the fastest since 2000? Coal. When I was at the IAEA, we did our World Energy Outlook every year or so, and if you go back and you look at the World Energy Outlook in 1993, 94, and we did this every scenario. We have this scenario rather every World Outlook. There would be business as usual or policies that are in place today. Okay. And they project them out. I'll do this for you, right? Is that the right way? Project them out. And if you look at where we are today, is exactly where we projected back in 1994, with business as usual and policies being implemented. And all of the policy talk, all of the policy actions that have been done since then hasn't amounted to anything. And, you know, someone just told me today that they're thinking of changing or minimizing or diminishing the service of the train I took down from San Francisco this morning.
Yeah, we do that all the time here.
And so why do we have to produce oil from the oil sands?
We have met the enemy, and the enemy is us.
Yeah, as Pogo said in 1969, we've met the enemy.
It costs you so much energy to do it. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Okay, anyway, we're going to move on. We'll take 2 more questions. How about over there, and then we'll come back over here. Yeah. Oh, okay, you. All right, okay, sorry.
How is the technology advancing in terms of barrels of energy equivalent in per barrel of energy out?
That's a good question, and you know that number. Adam, what's the answer to that?
Yeah, I don't have them off the top of my head. It's gotten better.
Yeah, it's a barrel in for, it's a barrel in for 4 barrels out.
Yeah, that's probably
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
The worst of this IB is 30 to 35%.
Yeah.
Mine's probably 20. So somewhere.
Yeah, you produce 5 to 15% more greenhouse gas emissions. That's kind of but then you lose a lot of energy. Yeah, I would say 20% is a good number. 25%, not good.
Okay.
Better than ethanol.
Okay, so we'll do 2 more. The gentleman in the blue shirt back there, and then we'll come over to you. No, you. Yes.
That was my question.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
The energy balance.
Okay, you got the answer. Okay, and this will be our last question.
I would rather imagine that a cheap source of heat would be of great interest to people.
Yes.
I've been messing with something for the last year that's called Strata Solar. The concept is basically collecting sunlight in 20 kilometers, running it down a light pipe in like 4 gigawatt pieces. And
Yeah.
the engineering is nasty on it, but it's worth considering.
The question is do we run out of the oil first, or do we do that first?
Yeah, but the other thing is I didn't see any mention in there of supercritical CO2. Has anybody worked on that?
Someone asked me that today or something like that, and I had heard some arcane discussion about what it doesn't do or what the nasty things it does in the bitumen, with bitumen in the reservoir. But I can't answer that. I thought someone was going to ask the nuclear question.
I don't think it's deep enough to have supercritical CO2.
You can't get
you need pretty high pressures, and most of these things are shallow enough that it would be not
I'm just talking
possible
about
to have
CO2.
You would fracture the ground, and the CO2 would just come up.
Always put it under pressure.
Well, you can't put it under that much pressure.
Mining stuff,
Oh, yeah, oh, in a containment vessel, right, yeah, yeah. Okay, anyway, well, we have to thank you for a very interesting talk.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.